Hi, you're with Peter Carr and Juan Villanueva on LonghausTV. Earlier this week, we attended the IBM Analyst event in Sydney called Insights 2013. Juan, it's always a jam-packed day trying to explain the IBM portfolio, past performance, future directions, strategy, acquisitions, all in the space of less than 8 hours. Always a difficult task, but makes for an interesting event. Certainly, we were greeted at the start of the day by Andrew Stevens, who is the Managing Director for IBM in Australia and New Zealand. Glenn painted a fairly rosy picture of the performance of the growth markets for IBM, of which Australia and New Zealand is a pretty significant part of that growth markets, which is a very broad global footprint. So when we talk about growth markets, Australia's in it, but there's also African countries that are in it. There's parts of Asia that are in it, and obviously places like Japan and stuff are outside of that. So growth markets for IBM, quite rosy historically. So we're kind of talking up to the end of last year, right? A little bit difficult to get any information about current performance. Things are obviously very challenging economically in Australia at this point in time. Understandably, IBM were in a blackout period for reporting, so probably didn't get some of the level of insights that we might have liked in that area. My sense is things are a little bit flatter at the moment than the rosy picture painted for how things were until the 31st of December. But you know, that was a personal take in lieu of any financial reporting to come out soon. The scope of the day was essentially some overviews, some clients who we can't talk about because they are under NDA, but some very interesting stories which gives us some confidence to provide some deeper analysis around capability. And there were 4 or 5 key topics: smarter commerce, cloud computing, big data and analytics, social business, and then there was the catch-all for software group. So, Juan, what were some of the highlights, I guess, for you for that day, for the events that you attended anyway, because we obviously split them up between us?
Yeah, well, I think last year for IBM was a pretty busy day, a pretty busy year, doing some announcements like Pure Systems, Big Data, Flex, and some X systems too. And this year, I think they want to capitalize on that in the Big Data space.
So these are all kind of product families like Pure Systems, which was formerly what came out of Netezza, and all those sorts of things. So within this big data portfolio, and so some of those were in this big data and smarter analytics program.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think this year we will see more of them, more announcements on that area, and also I'm thinking that big data is the trend that will lead the market now in the business with the same operative model, a flexible operative model. Cloud is the answer.
And it seems to be that they information was obviously a common theme through all of these programs, but taking these solutions view like smarter commerce, there was obviously a high analytical component in smarter commerce, not just from the traditional transactional analytics, but also maybe social analytics coming into that, the social business, a lot of analytics in that space. So we're not just talking about the appliances within a typical analytical or data warehouse environment, are we? We're really talking about solution capability in any part of the business that requires analytics now.
Yes, it's interesting what they are doing in the social business space. They are trying to integrate the back end of the business, the employee workforce, and also the customers' analytics. Mm-hmm. So the idea their idea is they want to make companies work better internally with better collaborative tools.
Yeah, right.
But also they want to get or gather better insights from their customers. Mm. Better information from their customers, and combine all this information in a better collaborative suite. That's pretty much the social business.
Yeah, and look, I think you've hit on a number of things there. The fact that businesses can no longer operate in these silos that they've typically operated in, and the social business is a perfect example. I like the fact that they're kind of starting to take a real human capital management view within this social business. And so typically, we may have seen from an employee perspective, traditional transactional HR systems or something like that. But now there's social platforms like Connections, together with the collaborative suite for other parts of that former Lotus platform, together with some of these other capabilities that they've now purchased, specifically in the human capital space with their acquisition of Connexa. We're starting to see the employee as the asset really come to the fore, and of course empowering employees means bringing information in from outside the organisation as well, and so this connectedness becomes very important from a collaboration perspective. I liked some of the conversations around smarter commerce. So smarter commerce has for a while been about improving e-commerce capabilities. Can we transact better, and websites and click frenzy and all those sorts of things. But for me, the smarter commerce presentations actually went much deeper this year, and I was excited that there were some insights for me in terms of specific industries starting to demonstrate specific patterns for solutions around smarter commerce. For example, an airline may have different requirements for smarter commerce compared to a retailer, and a retailer may have different requirements compared to a banking institution, for example. And so, and then there's a hybrid between those sorts of things. So we're going to be writing a little bit more about these patterns in smarter commerce. There was a lot to cover. Cloud, again, we could spend a whole session talking about cloud. For me, the interesting thing about cloud was now this end-to-end integration where you can actually be involved in an IBM public cloud environment all the way to a private enterprise cloud environment, and that was really interesting. Plus also the release in the roadmap of being able to access SAP applications, Oracle applications, even Microsoft Outlook, SharePoint applications in the next 12 to 18 months in an IBM cloud environment. So I think some of those are pretty significant announcements. If we had to wrap up a couple of things, as real takeaways for you, what would one of those be?
Well, key priorities for IBM, I think, is social business is getting really important for them.
Start to see a lot more noise in the market. Yes. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, the smarter commerce, as you said, probably following by analytics, which analytics is the foundation on everything is happening now. Big data, and I will say the typical mobile and collaboration, then cloud, and yes.
So the very strategic capability within the IBM portfolio is really that we can't question that. For me, some takeaways. I think we might be in the middle of a little bit of, shaky ground transition for IBM in this part of the world. Having said that, I don't question for a second their capability. I don't question for a second their strategic vision. I love it. Execution in local markets is always challenged because there's such a large and matrixed organisation. And I think the area where that came out the most was in Software Group. In Software Group, there's dozens and dozens of brands, and being able to present them from a solution perspective to a client in an integrated fashion, as opposed to selling products out of a price book, is still one of their challenges. Every couple of years we tend to go through a cycle and they rationalise, but then we kind of end up back in this position where we're trying to make sense of 40 different brands within quite a tight solution space. And that happens because they're one of the biggest acquirers in the market. They got a lot of cash, they buy a lot of companies, the companies that they buy seem to fit into this integrated information vision that they have, so it's necessary, but as a result, I think we kind of go through these cycles. So definitely, fantastic capability within IBM, worth considering in just about any enterprise IT situation, and a very interesting roadmap over the next 12 months. The IBM portfolio, past performance, future directions, strategy. Event, certainly global footprint. So when we talk about growth markets, Australia's in it, but there's also African countries that are in it. There's parts of Asia that are in it, and obviously places like Japan and stuff are outside of that. So growth markets, we were greeted at the start of the day by Andrew Stevens, who is the Managing Director for IBM in Australia and New Zealand. Glenn painted a fairly rosy picture of the performance of the growth markets for IBM, of which Australia and New Zealand is a pretty significant part.